Sometimes trying to understand global conflicts feels like you're trying to piece together a massive puzzle.
Yeah.
But maybe half the pieces are missing and the other half, well, they look like they belong to completely different puzzles altogether. It's kind of how it feels sometimes, right?
Definitely. You're just drowning in information.
Exactly. Headlines, official statements, social media just screaming at you, and often they all seem to clash. It's like trying to find your way through this thick fog. Especially now, in what people are calling this post-truth era. Getting to the actual core facts feels incredibly difficult.
And that term post-truth, it's interesting. It doesn't mean truth isn't out there, does it?
No, not at all. It's more like objective facts and agreement on what's real often get pushed aside by appeals to emotion or just really strong personal beliefs. Truth becomes something people fight over.
Right. It's contested territory.
So our mission today on the Deep Dive is to try and cut through some of that fog. We're going to look closely at two very recent, very significant global flashpoints.
Okay.
And we're not just going to retell the events. We want to dissect the layers, the claims, the counterclaims, and really explore how truth itself gets shaped, maybe even spun, in these really high-stakes situations.
So less about who technically won or lost on the ground.
Exactly. More about how the story gets told.
Yeah.
The goal is to give you, our listener, a bit of a shortcut. We want to provide those essential nuggets of knowledge and insight without just dumping a huge load of information on you.
Right. And what we're really digging into here isn't just the battlefield results. It's about how these competing stories are built, why they end up being so different, and what that actually means for how we understand these critical global events.
It's like being an investigator, almost.
Yeah, sort of. We'll look at the specific details from these two conflicts, like forensic evidence, and then try to connect them to that bigger picture, how truth is manipulated and how we perceive it. It's a fascinating but also pretty sobering when you get into it.
Okay, let's start with the first one then. A situation that really sent shockwaves across the Middle East just, a few weeks ago. The U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. This happened very recently, June 22nd, 2025. Key sites targeted were Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan.
The big ones.
Ones that everyone watches.
Right. And this wasn't just out of blue, was it? These strikes were apparently carried out on behalf of Israel, part of this larger escalating Iran-Israel conflict that really kicked off around June 13th.
Yeah, the context is crucial.
And this was a serious military operation. Codename Operation Midnight Hammer. They used some pretty sophisticated weapons, too.
They certainly did. We're talking about the GBU-57AB MOP bombs, the bunker busters, essentially.
Ah, right, designed to go deep underground. Exactly. And Tomahawk missiles, too, known for their precision over long distances. Just choosing those weapons, well, it sends a very clear signal, doesn't it? An intent to hit hard, hit deep, especially at Iran's most protected nuclear sites.
The messaging was definitely not subtle there.
Not at all.
Wow. So the weapons themselves tell part of the story.
Yeah.
What about the immediate aftermath? The information war, the claims?
Ah, well, that's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite confusing. Almost immediately after the strikes, the narratives just shot off in completely different directions.
How so?
Well, from one side, particularly coming from, U.S. and Israeli sources, we heard these really bold, very clear claims. Iran's nuclear program was, quote, completely and totally obliterated.
Completely obliterated. That's a strong statement.
Extremely strong. And it was even backed up publicly by the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, which, gives it that official stamp of credibility for a lot of people.
Right, makes it sound definitive.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic, really. Declare this overwhelming success to shape how people see it, maybe even deter Iran from retaliating too strongly.
Okay, so that was the initial, very public claim. Did the facts, the evidence on the ground, actually match up with completely obliterated?
Well, not really. Not even close, actually. When you look at the counter evidence that started trickling out pretty quickly, it painted a very different picture.
Like what?
Satellite imagery, for instance. It became available quite soon after. And yes, it showed damage, no question. You could see 6 distinct craters at the Fordo facility.
6 craters, okay.
And a big blackened area at Isfahan. At Natanz, there was an 18-foot hole visible.
An 18-foot hole? Given how deep some of those facilities are supposed to be.
Precisely. An 18-foot hole, while significant, immediately made people question how deep the damage really went. It suggested, maybe a tactical hit rather than wiping the whole thing out.
So damage, but maybe not annihilation.
Exactly. And crucially, Those early U.S. intelligence assessments, the ones circulating inside the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, they were quietly suggesting a much less severe outcome.
Oh, really? What were they saying?
They were estimating maybe a setback of a few months, perhaps even up to a year or so for Iran's program, but definitely not decades. A huge gap between that and completely obliterated.
Wow. A massive difference between the public declaration and the internal assessment. How did Iran react to all this? What was their narrative?
Iran's response was, well, just as quick and, you could say, just as performative in its own way. They fired 19 missiles at the big U.S. Al Udeid air base over in Qatar.
19 missiles, okay.
And their supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he immediately framed it as a severe slap to America. He claimed a victory over the Zionist regime, as he put it.
A severe slap. So, again, very specific language.
Very specific. And it's a perfect example of what you might call the spin is the win dynamic. Each side is twisting the story to fit their own agenda, right? They're playing to their audience back home, and they're trying to send a clear message internationally.
Makes sense. Iran needed to look strong.
Absolutely. Show strength to their own people, project resilience to their enemies. Even if the actual damage to the U.S. base wasn't, catastrophic, it becomes less about the physical impact and more about that symbolic act of hitting back.
So it's like they're fighting on two fronts, the physical one and the information one.
Exactly. And I imagine there are still unanswered questions from all this, things that are still murky.
Oh, absolutely. Even now, things like potential radiation leaks from those damaged sites.
Yeah.
That's incredibly unclear.
Right. You'd expect some clarity on that.
You would. And the whole issue of compensation for any victims or damage to nearby infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's just silence on that. It just adds to that fog, that uncertainty. It makes it really hard for anyone on the outside to know the full truth.
That silence can be just as telling as the loud claims, can't it?
It really can. Okay, so we've seen how this narrative battle plays out with the U.S. and Iran. But what's really striking is this isn't unique, is it? It feels like a pattern we see again and again.
Unfortunately, yes. It's becoming almost standard operating procedure.
So let's shift focus now to another very volatile region, the India-Pakistan border. We see really similar dynamics there, but with different actors and, sadly, equally devastating consequences.
Right. Another long simmering conflict zone.
This particular flare-up, this deep dive, really, it started after that horrific terrorist attack in Pahalgam in Kashmir. That was back on April 22nd, 2025.
A really tragic event.
Yeah, truly awful. 26 people were killed, just brutally. And the attack was quickly linked to groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which India maintains are backed by Pakistan.
Links that go back years, of course.
Exactly. So in response, India launched Operation Sindoor. That was on May 7th, 2025. They struck 9 sites inside Pakistan, and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. India's official story was that these were precision strikes, hitting terrorist infrastructure, using long-range weapons to be accurate, and, importantly, they claimed, to minimize collateral damage.
Precision strike, that's always the claim, isn't it? So the big question again, what was the actual impact, and how was that story told?
Well, India's leadership, Prime Minister Modi specifically, he came out almost immediately and declared it an unqualified success.
Unqualified success. No ambiguity there.
None. The narrative pushed to the Indian public was one of decisive action, hitting every single target with, pinpoint accuracy, delivering justice, showing India's strength and resolve. It was designed to reassure people at home and project power abroad, a clear claim of victory.
Okay, so unqualified success from India. How did Pakistan push back against that specific narrative?
Well, Pakistan's counter-narrative was just as strong and actually quite fascinating in how it directly contradicted India's story. They very quickly claimed their forces had actually shot down Indian planes.
Shot down planes, that's a direct counter, yeah. Totally contradicting India's claim of precision and no losses. And then, adding another layer, their army chief at the time, General Asim Munir, was actually promoted to field marshal, specifically citing his leadership during these events.
Promoted. Wow.
Uh-huh.
So that suggests...
It suggests not just that they took minimal damage, but that they successfully defended themselves. It paints a picture of victory against Indian aggression. It wasn't just denying India's success, it was crafting their own narrative of being the successful defenders.
That's quite a move. Don't just deny, create your own win. How did this actually play out beyond the statements? Was there more action?
Oh, yes. It definitely escalated into an active exchange. We saw drone strikes, missile strikes going back and forth across the border.
Right.
And grimly, there were reports of 16 civilian deaths inside Pakistan from these exchanges. A stark reminder of the human cost that often gets lost in these dueling narratives of success.
Absolutely. Civilians caught in the middle.
Always. But despite these exchanges, both sides seemed to pull back from, full-scale direct military engagement. They kept it to a certain level, maintaining this very delicate, very dangerous balance.
A brinkmanship.
Exactly. It's like watching this carefully staged performance sometimes. The public statements are loud and clear, designed for political effect, but they often feel quite disconnected from the more complicated reality on the ground.
And leads to that analogy you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it really can feel like two kids arguing over who won the fight in the sandbox, can it? Both claiming victory, even if the sand is all messed up. But we absolutely have to remember, these aren't just games. The human cost is real and devastating. Civilians pay the price for this narrative warfare.
It's a crucial point. So, okay, we have these intense conflicts, these clashing narratives.
Yeah.
What does all this mean for the big international bodies? The ones we kind of rely on to keep the peace, or at least provide some clarity, like the UN, NATO, the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog.
Right, you'd hope they could step in as, like, the referees, the arbiters of truth.
Yeah. But how effective are they, really, in these situations?
Well, if we connect these incidents to that bigger picture, what becomes pretty obvious is that their effectiveness is often, well, limited, especially in these really deep-rooted, politically explosive conflicts.
Limited how? Take the UN Security Council in the Iran case.
Okay, yeah. The Security Council condemned the strikes on Iran. They issued statements. But did they take any real decisive action? No.
Why not?
Because it often gets paralyzed. You have the permanent members, the US, Russia, China, they all have veto power, and their own geopolitical interests rarely align perfectly. So getting unified action is incredibly hard, often impossible.
Gridlock.
Pretty much. And NATO, same story in a way. They expressed concern about the Iran strikes, sure, but they didn't intervene. NATO's main focus is still largely European security. These events happen outside that core area, so while they watch closely, it doesn't trigger their main mechanisms.
So they become more like concerned observers.
Largely, yes. More of a platform for discussion among members than a body taking direct action in a situation like that.
And what about the IAEA? Their job is literally to monitor Iran's nuclear program. They must have had a clearer picture.
You'd think so, but they've faced huge challenges too. Their job is verification, providing factual reports. But after the strikes, they really struggled to give definitive answers. They operate under immense political pressure from all sides. So even their factual findings can get spun or interpreted through different political lenses, making it incredibly hard for them to make unambiguous statements that everyone accepts.
Caught in the political crossfire themselves.
Exactly. And if you look at the India-Pakistan situation, again, the UN called for restraint. That's the standard diplomatic playbook response.
We hear that phrase a lot.
We do. But historically, those calls for restraint, while important, rarely translate into real, tangible changes on the ground in that conflict. The underlying issues remain.
So it sounds like these institutions are often stuck, maybe. Like having a referee who blows the whistle but doesn't really have the power to enforce the rules.
That's actually a pretty good analogy. They provide vital spaces for talking, for diplomacy. They coordinate humanitarian aid. They can impose sanctions, which sometimes have an effect.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But decisive military or political intervention to stop a conflict initiated by major powers, that's incredibly rare. It just reflects the messy reality of global politics, national interests, sovereignty concerns. They often outweigh that ideal of a unified international response.
They're necessary, but maybe not sufficient.
That sums it up well. They're part of the system, but their power has real limits, often more symbolic than direct when it comes to these major flashpoints.
So when we put these two deep dives together, the U.S.-Iran strikes and the India-Pakistan clashes, what they really highlight is that central challenge we talked about at the start, this era of, let's call it, contested facts. Truth becomes so incredibly slippery when these official narratives are so powerful, so contradictory, and so skillfully managed.
Yeah, it's like that puzzle again, isn't it? But now it feels like every piece you pick up has been subtly reshaped or repainted by someone. And what that really demands from us as people trying to understand the world is, well, a healthy dose of skepticism. It forces us to be more active, more critical thinkers.
Not just passively scrolling headlines.
No way. It means we have to proactively cross-check sources. Look for consistency or inconsistency. Try to understand the potential biases behind different news outlets or government statements. It's about searching for the nuances, resisting those easy black and white claims.
Because the full picture is almost never that simple.
Never. And, while we've used some analogies, maybe even a bit of dark humor to talk about the spin and the sandbox fights, we absolutely cannot forget the profound human cost here.
That's critical.
It really is. The civilian lives lost in Pakistan, the potential long-term health effects near the Iranian sites, the displacement, the fear, the instability. That's the devastating reality behind these geopolitical chess games.
So the goal here isn't for listeners to feel overwhelmed by all this conflicting information, right? It's more about being better equipped.
Exactly. It's about being informed in the truest sense, understanding the different perspectives, even the ones you disagree with, and really trying to grasp the deep complexity that underlies these global events.
We've definitely tried to cut through some serious layers today. I feel like we have a clearer picture, even if that picture is one of complexity and contested narratives.
Yeah, me too.
It seems pretty clear that in today's world, really understanding what's happening globally means doing more than just reading the headlines. It means learning how to see the spin, how to understand the substance or lack thereof, and figuring out the strategic reasons behind every statement.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you continue to follow the news, as you watch other conflicts or tensions unfold around the world, try asking yourself this. Beyond those immediate claims, victory, defeat, success, failure, what narratives are really being pushed?
Who benefits from that narrative?
Exactly. Who is crafting them and why? And maybe most importantly, what responsibility do we have as people who consume this information to dig a little deeper, to seek out that fuller, more nuanced picture? That ongoing pursuit of clarity, I think, is more crucial now than ever.